So trusted autonomy, right? What does that mean? And I mean, I'll concede it's a slightly buzzwordy type phrase because it doesn't mean much, but it really does encapsulate exactly what we want to have from our developers and the way we want to treat each other as well. So before I get into what that means exactly, I'll just introduce myself. So I'm Ben. I'm the software architect at Bleacher Report. We are hiring for backend, which is mostly Elixir, front end for React, Android, and some Kotlin, and iOS for Swift. And one of the reasons that we're hiring is because we have had this great success with Elixir and Erlang over the past 3 years. It's really changed the way that we operate. It's really changed the way that our work-life balance. Like, you can talk to Pete. Pete's been here for a while. He's awkwardly looking in the back. But he can talk about how our system has gone from being a relatively unstable system to a pretty performant system, where now you don't have to carry your laptop when you're on call because nothing really goes wrong for the most part. Like, it's computers, so things inevitably fail. And it's a really fun place to work. We have a great coworkers, great culture, and all that stuff. And Fast Company apparently ranked us as the third most innovative place to work last year, which I guess means that they're also fans of Elixir. But what that and of course they don't care about Elixir, but implicitly that means that all of the things that we're able to deliver in the innovative platform that we have now are as a result of Elixir. So I showed this slide sometime last year, and this just gives an overview of where we are at the company, and I think this also shows the way that we've sort of tried to distribute knowledge across the platform. So you can see that these, from the previous time I showed this slide, the numbers were lower, and now they've increased as we've added more people, and more people have become shared developers on these applications. I think one of the nice things about this is that we've managed to maintain the software quality over these last 4 years. The first application that powers the clients, I mean, that was barely after Elixir 1.0, and Phoenix was was like 0.5 dev, and now we have the Phoenix 1.3 branch that we need to merge in, and we managed to keep it clean. And I think that's a real indicator of how we've been able to do this, and some of the success we have had from that. And also, we have a service-oriented architecture, but it's not necessarily a microservice. It's not medium-sized services. We just try to have discrete functional services, and OTP and supervision trees give us a really nice way to do that. So, for instance, like the OEmbed app has expanded to do other things, but they all fall under the same sort of OEmbed umbrella, and they're all separate and discrete. So that's been a nice way to design these things as well. So this is the availability that we've had over the last year. That's how we calculate it. That's from the Google SRE book. It's not 5 nines, but we're not a telecom company either. If our site falls over, it's an embarrassment, and it causes me great mental anguish, but we don't get fined by the government. And so that's good enough, I guess, for us. It's not that that's what we aim for. We aim to, of course, for the 5 nines like anyone else, but we understand that the reality that it might not be that important to have 5 nines for us. This is the latency graph for the last year. Again, it's pretty good. We try to have sub 100 milliseconds for our response time. And this is a Datadog graph, and we had one really bad night in July, but Datadog covers that up when you stretch that over the year. So again, it's not with our challenges, but overall, I think we're pleased with the way things are going. And so over the last year, I've sort of moved into this architecture role, where I've had to step back from coding on a daily basis and move into towards more planning and these kind of things. And I had a sort of a naive impression of what the job would detail. I was like, well, if a developer, you work on a number of applications, and so as an architect, you step back and then you work on a greater number of applications. But that's simply not the case. I mean, no one person can keep the whole system in their head. You have to rely on a lot of other people. And I had a one-on-one with my boss a few weeks ago, or a while ago, and I said, you sort of tricked me. And he said, well, how do you mean? And when I first started Bleacher Report, we sort of talked about the career path. You can either go towards like the manager director route, or you can go towards the architect route. And I was like, well, I like systems, and I like writing code and these kind of things, so I definitely want to go towards the architect path. And he said, well, so why did you trick me? How do you feel that I tricked you? And I was like, well, you didn't tell me that this was going to be managing people. Like, I'm essentially both responsible for the system and for the people as well, because they're the vehicle through which we create this platform. And so he's like, yeah, of course, that's the game. Except as an architect, you have no power to enforce people to do anything. So you just have to sort of negotiate with people. And it turns out that that's actually a pretty big advantage, because instead of having one person design a system, it becomes a much more collaborative and cohesive way to do things. And as we've expanded over the last couple of years, and as we prepare for this big hiring boom that we're doing this year, we want to make sure that we maintain not only the code standards, but the culture standards and the sort of expressive workplace that we have. And currently we have 28 services. Most of them are relatively small services, not quite microservices, as I said before, but we have a lot of services. About 18 of those are Elixir. The other 10-ish are Ruby or some other leftover things from the legacy side of things. So that's quite a lot of things that have changed, a lot of things to keep in mind. And of course, it's increasing complexity. And also when you add in a new person or a new service, these also increase complexity. And this has really been the challenge over the last years. How do we maintain this quality, and how do we allow this increased complexity without sacrificing any of the things that we've put in place? And so like a lot of other companies, we have an architecture review board. And this is the way that new technology is introduced. But it's a very top-down structure, right? Like you have a small group of people who decide what technology we use or what things we're going to go after. And we have different developers who want to, if you want to invest in this technology or you want to try this idea, this is they can present a proposal and they can come in and then we'll evaluate it and put it into the pipeline. But again, this is a very top-down structure. And it's also sort of opaque to a lot of developers as well, because it seems that it's this sort of ivory tower type removed from everyday life group. But in fact, it's quite the opposite. Like this is the advocacy. This is the advocacy group for the technology side for Bleacher Report, and it's a failure on our part that we haven't made this more open. And this is something that we're trying to do this year, is to make it more open, so that everyone feels free to to adapt to propose ideas and to have their voice heard. And again, it's a very sort of macro level over the entire architecture. Last year, we had this concept where we had service reviews. And this was more of a top-down structure as well. This was where the top-level people decided, like mostly the director level, and then some of the leads decided, we want to have all of our services, and this is similar for iOS, Android, and the front end as well, but we're just going to focus on the back end for now. We want to have all of our services to be as uniform as possible. And what that means is that if you have the monitoring is the same on every app, so all of our 28 services have the same monitoring. We have the same test coverage, roughly. And the idea of that is so that we can flatten the organization and spread the knowledge so that you can work on one app and you're not bound to one app. So we've really tried to decrease specialization and increase knowledge throughout the whole organization. And as I said, this was top down. We set the standards and the developers incorporated them. And again, this was more of we focused on the standards themselves. Like we didn't talk about tech debt, we didn't talk about how often refactor, we didn't talk about these. This was more just to get everything up to speed. And again, both of these things are top down. So the architecture review board is probably the macro level. And this is a functional area, which is a smaller level. But again, it's still top down, and we're imposing sort of our will on the developers. And it can seem kind of micromanagey, right? Like, do this, and it's all. There doesn't seem to be much from the other side. We don't have like the voice coming up from below. And as we have these more complex structures and we add more people, this is going to get more and more difficult. And no one likes to be micromanaged. I certainly don't like to be micromanaged. Like, autonomy is one of the nice things about software in general, is that you can work remotely, you can work from wherever you want, you can get the work done. And so I was worried that we were imposing these kind of unnecessary constraints on people, and people would start to buck against the trend and these kind of things. And so from my background working with Elixir and Erlang and OTP and these kind of things, I thought, I don't know about management, I don't want to be a manager, but I do like systems and I do like what OTP has to offer. So what if we take OTP and apply these principles, roughly, to managing people, or to managing the people who write the software to make the architecture. And OTP, of course, has these resilient, fault-tolerant, concurrent, all of these things. So these are the things that we want. We want to have bidirectional ideas. We want to have we want to make sure that we get messages passed back and forth, and we don't want to, and in case one thing goes bad, it doesn't affect other things. We want to isolate them. So this is roughly what we have for our structure. So at the top, incidentally, we have a functional lead, and that's for each of the disciplines. So you have a backend functional lead, front end, iOS, and Android. And then below you have, in this case, one service, and each service has two service owners. And as you can see, they pass messages back and forth. Unlike processes, obviously, they can infect each other. So if one developer is unhappy, then they can spread that to other people, so you want to make sure that everyone's happy. But the nice thing about this is that this places a lot of responsibility on the developers themselves. So they get to own the service. They get to say what's wrong with it and how to improve it. And it really allows us to spread out for greater detail. And so the way that we've done this this year is we're going to do these things called application reviews. So this is quite the opposite. So last year, service reviews, all the applications look similar. Everything is the same, roughly speaking. And this is from the other side. So this is from bottom up. So now the service owners are the ones who are responsible for saying, this part of the app needs to be refactored. This part of the app, we're a couple of versions behind on Elixir or Phoenix or what have you, or we want to try this new way to do things. This is their opportunity to do that. Bleacher Report is a media company, right? We're not a technology company. We use technology to drive people to the site, to display our media, to engage with our users. So there's a constant tension, and maybe this is similar in pure technology companies as well, but there's always a tension between product and engineering, right? Product says we want these features, and engineering says we want these features in terms of technical debt refactoring and these kind of things, but also these new, the business side doesn't care if we switch to Cassandra because it delivers these features for us. They only care how does this feature, how can we switch to newer technology that would allow us to better utilize these other features that we have. So this is a way for us to drive these things, drive pure technical projects through the product lifecycle as well. And I think this is also one of the nice things is that it encourages bidirectional ideas. It's bottom up, and the sort of terms of worker and supervisor have some sort of, unnecessary connotations, especially when you're talking about people, because it does impose sort of a hierarchical structure that I don't want to associate with them. I mean, my last name is Marx after all, so I have a very flat structure in the way I see things. But this is really important to me, and the way that an example of the way that we've been able to implement this is with Kafka. So now that we have this stable system and we want to take on more ambitious projects, one of the projects we're working on this year that we're slowly rolling out, the people who were working on the project, the service owners for this project, decided that Kafka would be a great tool to use. And no one at work had experience with Kafka, but again, you trust these people, we have these standards in place, so you build a proof of concept and you it either works or it doesn't. And Kafka was an interesting case because I guess everyone knows that Bleacher Report uses Elixir, and we've moved from Ruby. And I just want to be clear that a lot of the failings we had with Ruby were self-inflicted and not with the language itself, especially with regard to tech debt. But so when we set up this with this Kafka pipeline, we tried the Kafka library, and the producing side was fine, but the consumer side kept falling over with the amount of messages we passed to it. And then with the Erlang library, the broad at the time, this was 6 or 8 months ago, the library was a couple of versions behind Kafka. So, and 0.9, I think, was when they released this auto-routing buckets in Kafka. And so we had a dilemma, what do we do in this case? There are a few options. One, we could try to patch the library and submit patches to the open source, which would be the optimal solution, I guess. Or 2, we abandon Kafka. Or 3, we try a different language. And so we found an optimal solution that wasn't ideal, and the optimal solution was to use a Ruby driver that was better maintained and was up to date with the current version of Kafka, which allowed us to use the auto-routing buckets. So again, it's not optimal, but it was a solution that the developers advocated for because they have this autonomy to say this is what we want to do, and because of the safeguards that we have in place, we trusted them, and we had, not only did we trust them implicitly, trust but verify, but we trusted them explicitly because they had benchmarks to show that this would all work. So far that's worked out really well. 6 months or a year from now, we'll reevaluate that to see if that's still the case, and if we decide to integrate with Kafka more fully, then that might be another question that we have to do, because right now, currently, the Ruby app does nothing but consume. And if we make these more complex, like I don't want to give up the guarantees that Erlang and Elixir have in order to use Ruby. So this is something that we might have to revisit at another point in time. But so far, so good. And I think, I talked about this in the beginning, especially from like an architecture point of view. It's like, while I'm responsible for the system, just as the CTO is responsible for the entire engineering side, just as the CEO is responsible for everything else, this model encourages shared responsibility, right? As a service owner, if your app starts to fall apart, then you're on the hook for it. And it's funny, in any organization, you have different levels of engagement from people. You have the people who are ambitious, who want to do do many things, and you have people who are not so ambitious, and you have people who do the bare minimum. And so we try to structure these service owners in a way that the weaker people are with the more ambitious people, so in the hope that people will become more ambitious, or at least will be able to identify areas. And in the same way, it's self-selecting, right? Like it's very clear the people who are engaged in want to do things the way that they should do, as opposed to the people who aren't. And I'll talk about another example for push notifications. So push notifications were one of the first services that we rewrote in Elixir. And at the time, we were just starting with Elixir. This was before Gen Stage and other type of back pressure things. And it worked really well. Like it was a thing, I think, that convinced the business side that Elixir was the way to go, because we had the internal programmers, people who send out the alerts. We had users on Twitter, and we had the management themselves see how much faster the Elixir push notification system was. And we were also able to shed third-party dependencies that were quite expensive. And at the time, we forked an Erlang library for APNS, and we didn't do a very good job of maintaining the fork. And now that GCM, or I guess FCM and APNS are moving to HTTP2 and are going to deprecate the HTTP, we decided, well, now is the time that we need to revisit this again. And we can take advantage of Gen Stage and some other niceties in the Elixir ecosystem. And this is an interesting problem as well. So on the Kafka side, we didn't know Kafka well enough to contribute to the library, do these things. But just like with the Kafka library, when we tried the HTTP2 client at scale, we found these problems. And the developer in charge of working on this, and again, we had the same problem. Either we fixed the library, we abandoned the library, or we tried something else. And so he worked with the creator of the library, and we were able to solve these problems to fix this and to have now the newer version of the push notification system, which should come out next month, which is even faster. And it's this is the optimal solution, right? We're able to contribute back to open source and to fix a problem where the creator of the library didn't even know existed because we'd never been tested at this scale. And so I think this is a really nice optimal solution. And as I mentioned in the beginning, talking about push notifications, this is the way that we drive people to our app and the way that we engage with people, and also the way that we break news. And the faster that our push notifications are, the more likely that people will continue to come to our app and to consume things with us. So that was optimal solution. And it's also, this sort of model incorporates ideas of ebb and flow, right? People come and go. I remember a friend was telling me I was frustrated with some stuff at work, and I'd been doing a lot of what I thought was hard work, and that I wasn't perhaps getting the credit that I was deserved, or that I was just frustrated with things that were going on at work. And he said to me, no one is irreplaceable. And at first I was really offended. I was like, what do you mean? I'm telling you all this stuff that I did for the company, and now you're telling me that I'll just go away and it's no big deal. And then once I sort of got over myself, I thought, well, that's actually sort of a freeing mentality, because no one is irreplaceable means that if I leave or anyone else leaves, someone else will step up. And in this model, I think it's much more easy to do that, because, for example, when we hire a new person, we tend to hire junior developers because we like to train them and turn them into senior developers. And the way that we do that is, you start after you get onboarded and get comfortable with things, then we assign you to a service. And again, this is sort of self-selecting, right? You can see how well the person handles that. Do they want more responsibility? Do they want to take on more things? And it gives a lot of freedom and autonomy for the person to decide how much they want to contribute to the job and how much they feel like they can get out of it and we can get out of them. And it also it gives more responsibility. It's a way that you can advance much easier. And finally, it's scalable, right? just like a supervision tree, when things get more complex, you can add a new supervisor, and then you can have these stretch on and on. And so, for instance, if we add more developers, and it turns out that we either need another architect or we need to have some intermediary step, then we can promote like a service owner to a cluster of services, and then they can manage those services. And again, we keep feeding these messages back and forth, just like in an OTP supervision tree. And again, it's a good way for advancement, and it's really flexible as well. One thing I guess you have to be careful with is to make sure that you design the supervision tree in a good way, because if you design it wrong, things could blow up. But again, these are people and not processes, so it's not quite the same thing. So this is a model that we've chosen to go forward, and so far it's worked out really well. And I guess it'll take about a year or two to evaluate how successful it'll be after we've made this big hiring push. But all in all, it's worked out really well for us, and it's been great. And then leave you with this sort of self-promotion. Here's a discount code if you're curious for adopting Elixir. I don't know why they made a mixed case / space number code, but so be it. So those are spaces, and good luck with that. So if you are curious about having Elixir, maybe just drop this off at your boss's desk, or just leave it around the office, and maybe they'll pick it up. So thanks very much. I know this was a brief talk, and I went through it pretty quickly, but thank you. Yeah.
So can you talk more kind of about how you dealt with that, or made that work for yourself?
Sure. I think it's also when I'm trying to think of the most neutral way to say this, but I have high standards for the things that I work on, and I want to make sure that those things, like I take a lot of pride in the work that I do, and doing a good job at the end of the day is something that's important to me. And when you have to delegate that work to other people and they have different levels of engagement, it's a bit harder to deal with that. So by having these trusted service owners, and some perhaps less trusted but still trusted, then like Pete here, that I think delegates some of that effort to other people so that you can trust them. And I really like it's some of the most frustrating things have been like when you ask people to do simple tasks. Like we want to have like I mentioned, we have 2 service owners, and we use the code owners file in GitHub to make sure that only those people can merge those the code review. And it took me like a week to get people to do it. And I was just like, come on, like this takes 2 seconds to do it, and if I can't trust you to do this, then what does that mean for other things that I ask you to do? So part of that is also me just understanding that people are busy, right? Like maybe they didn't see the email, maybe they didn't see the Slack. So it's ways of finding better ways to engage, and it's really more on me to adjust to my style, and to realize that expectations that I have might not be the best expectations, or that my own, I shouldn't work nights and weekends to fix something. Maybe that's not healthy. Maybe I need to look at the way things that I've been doing. But it's an ongoing process, clearly.
Could you describe some of the trade-offs between having coders versus just anybody on the team merging?
Sorry. The question was the trade-offs between having the code owners merge the pull request and other people merge the pull request. The reason that we have decided to do it that way is because the health of the application is ultimately the responsibility of the service owner. So if other people merge tickets on their behalf, then perhaps they don't agree with that, and we want to have that sort of barrier to say that these people have to be the ones to review the code, because if something goes wrong, then they're the ones who are at fault. So this is just a nice way to ensure that at least one of the 2 have validated the code.